speak to you about German genealogy. All of you should have received or may have requested the packet of handouts. If you do not have those, Gwen has said that you need to contact them and she will see that you get a set of the handouts from today's presentation. Well, the very first thing I want to talk about is we want to look and see, well, let's see. For some reason, I'm not advancing here. Here we go. When we talk about genealogy, do you really want to do genealogy or are you looking just for family information? As you collect that information, here's an example of a mini chart that I put together of my family on both my mother and father's side. Or are you looking for more detailed information where you can look at each individual generation? From there, once you start gathering your information, and then you can decide how you want to use that, you should write down all you know or think you know about a particular individual and make a list of all the alternate spelling of names and surnames. You also need to talk with relatives. Take a camera or a scanner with you, record the date, time, and location of your talk, copies of pictures with full names and dates of the photo. If you copy a page from a book, copy the title page also. Note the name and location of the library. Record complete information. Because today you might go, I don't really know what I'm going to use this information for, but someday you'll find where it fits into your puzzle. And then you're going to go, where did I get that information? Because now I have some more questions. So be sure you record that. Examples I want to give you on alternate spellings. My mother's side of the family is Lenhart, and then we spell it Lenhardt. However, one of my great uncles decided he didn't want the DT and only spelled it Lenhart. And then as I went back further in my German history, they spelled with the D and not the T. So you never know how those names are going to change or why people changed them. Talk to the oldest relative first. Take a snack with you because sugar makes people talk. Older folks keep birth, death, funeral, graduation, marriage, engagement notices, newspaper clippings, etc. I went to a cousin's house in Oklahoma once, and she had a huge box filled with this information. Now, you got to take a scanner or a camera with you because oftentimes relatives don't want this original information to leave their homes. So with our cameras today, you certainly can get some good pictures of that information so that you don't have to sit and write all of that down. Now, information to ask. Get full names, nicknames, date and place of birth, baptism, and marriage. On full names, as an example, I had an Uncle Pete. Well, when I started doing my research, I found out Pete was a nickname. His real name is Forrest. I don't know how they got Pete out of Forrest, but his name was Forrest, not Pete. We also want to ask about death records, burial locations, and cemeteries with the city and state. There are so many cemeteries that have the same name, so it's important to get the city and state as well. And then addresses of where those relatives lived or may have lived, their occupations, hobbies, religious preferences, and note siblings with the same name. We Germans sometimes, as a child would become deceased, would then name the next child of the same gender with that same name. So it's real important that you note if you have siblings with the same names. I would suggest that you use a family group sheet to record your information. And it can be listed both with the husband's name first or the wife's name. And then you have the opportunity to list all the children. You can get one of those free, usually from Family Search, or Ancestry also has some copies of those. On the family group sheet, fill in the full name plus any nicknames. Genealogical dates are usually listed as day, month, and year. So when you write the year, be sure you put the full year in, because if I had put in 1901-13, that 13 could have been 1713, 1813, 1913, 2013. So be sure you list the full years so that you have January 19th, 2013. With the women, be sure and put in their maiden names, or in the event that they have been married more than once, that you list all of their last names. If the document that you're looking at has misspelled a name, note that misspelling, because once it's misspelled, it will be misspelled again. And sometimes it's just a matter of whoever recorded it, that's how they would spell it, not necessarily how the individual would have spelled it. If in your history you are told that there are, say, 3 boys and 2 girls in the family, be sure you leave room to add those as you find those individuals. The family group sheet will give you that opportunity to begin to see the missing information that you have. Baptismal names. In our German culture, there are 2 names given at baptism. The first name is a spiritual name. It honors a favorite saint. It's usually repeated in the family, and you'll see Johann for the boys and Johanna, Anna, or Maria for the girls. The second name, or middle name, as we might call it here, is actually their call name, but it is used for legal documents. As an example, Johann Heinrich Ottman, here we call Henry Ottman. Jacob Friedrich Ottman, we call Friedrich Ottman. And Maria Catherine Stocklin, we call Catherine Stocklin. And note the Catherines, sometimes they're spelled with C, sometimes with K. Don't care, that's still the same name. And Anna Maria Rule, we would call Mary Rule. Senior and junior. Don't get confused or assume that if someone has senior after their name, that they indeed, junior is their offspring. Senior merely denotes that they're older. In my family, I had a senior Adam and a junior Adam, but they are not related. They were not father and son. Aunt and cousin oftentimes is used to mean an extended family. And mother, of course, may also refer to mother-in-law. So don't get too upset or excited about, gee, I didn't know that was a cousin or an aunt, or I didn't realize that wasn't his son. Those titles have different meanings. Naming patterns. Germans prior to 1870 will be using the following one, and this is in your handouts if you received it. The English, well, I have included not only German, but the English and Welsh, the Irish and the Scottish and early Dutch. As you can see on the Germans prior to 1870. Now you will still find some after 1870 that are following these guidelines. But normally the first son is named after the father's father. The second son is named after the mother's father. The third son after the father. The fourth son after the father's oldest brother. And the fifth son after the second oldest brother or the mother's oldest brother. Now, why is that important? Well, if you're having trouble finding someone, knowing what the father's name was will help you come forward possibly and find that uh, offspring, or it will help you go backwards. If you know that the oldest son is the father's name, then that will give you a clue as to where to go. And then you can see the English, Irish, and Scottish Dutch. The females are pretty much the same way. The first daughter is named after the mother's mother. Second daughter after the father's mother. Third daughter after the mother. The fourth daughter after the mother's oldest sister. And the fifth daughter after the mother's second oldest sister or father's oldest sister. Again, giving you that opportunity to try to find that name. Now, keep in mind, sometimes as they would come forward, they might pick up the baptismal name rather than the call name or that middle name that we talked about. If they pick up the Johann, yeah, that could be a problem. And then remember again, once there is a death in the family, that name may be reused. So it's very important to be sure and get as many dates as you can so that you can follow that line. This is a research checklist that's been put together, and I put a copy of it in your handout, but it gives you some ideas of where you can go look for information that you might not have considered. As you can see on the form, it lists cemetery and census and church records and court records, education, employment, home records, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And particularly if you're having trouble finding some information, these are sources that you may want to look at. Tax records become extremely important, assuming your folks paid their taxes. Unlike my Uncle Henry, who did not pay the taxes in Kansas when our family lived out there, and the farm was repossessed only later to find it was filled with oil. I could be an oil baroness, but no, Uncle Henry didn't pay the taxes. But you might be able to find some information there. Cemetery information. At the cemetery, be sure you take a camera, a notebook, or some graph paper to draw out the location in the cemetery, a yardstick in case you want to measure the size of it, take a picture of the gravestone in sight, take a picture of the cemetery sign, because again, you need to remember where you found that, because that may be the one and only time you're at that cemetery. Most of our phones and some of our cameras all have GPS locations that again could be helpful to you in the future. Note the full names and dates on the stone and look around because you may find some other relatives. As an example, I have an uncle who is buried in Blue Island Cemetery in Blue Island, Illinois, just out of Chicago. His son is buried there as well. And you'll see him on the bottom picture. My uncle is the second one back. And then the one I have marked as Samuel Ottman. I went, who's Samuel Ottman? Well, come to find out in the family, Samuel died when he was 17. And it was at an age when once someone of a child's age passed, it was not spoken of again. I had no idea who this was. My father was still living at the time. I asked him, who's Samuel Ottman? He said, I have no idea, but I found his gravestone. So be sure you look around because we tend to bury in some family groupings. Not always true, but we did indeed. I found Samuel that I did not know existed. I earlier had said, be sure you record all the names and dates as you see it on the tombstone. I do caution you, because that's what's on the stone doesn't mean that it's always correct, but it will give you some guidance. Sometimes, particularly like on these stones, all we have is the year. Sometimes we get month and day. Keep in mind that sometimes that month and day will represent the day they were buried, not necessarily the day they died. So just note that difference on your family group sheet or whatever, however you're keeping your information. And then you can refer back to it and can finally decide, oh, that's their burial date, not the death date. Then you'll find some of the stones, particularly here in the east of the Mississippi, you'll find lots of German references where Vater is father, Mutter is mother, and then the born dates and the death dates. Then here's an example of one that I took in Munich in Germany, and it has the rest in peace in German. And then we're seeing on the tombstones now the asterisk, which stands for birth, the cross, which stands for death. You will also see that in church records, and you do see quite a bit of that here in the United States. I've seen it in many local Ohio references. And in the church records, you'll also see the other things that I have listed here. The two little wavy river water signs for baptism, a square for male, two crosses being the line extinction, the marriage symbol, the female symbol, the male symbols. They're in your handouts. But you will see those in church records as a shorthand that is used. I've also listed for you, and this is in the handouts as well, Latin phrases that you might find on older stones. Memento mori, the top of the second row there, is a very popular one that you will find, particularly in eastern United States. And that's just remember that you too will die, you too will be here. And then I've also listed some name abbreviations because you'll go, gee, I don't know if that's really my relative or not, because some of them, it depended on the carver and how much space he had and what he wanted to use. But these are some examples of abbreviations that you will see. Again, it's in your handout. We happened to be in Paris at the Père Lachaise Cemetery and stumbled across A. Fred Chopin. Well, if you look on the left-hand side, that's Friedrich Chopin, but they chose to abbreviate his name up at the top. I thought that was kind of sad for someone as well known as Friedrich Chopin. Recently, I was in Tennessee at the Parker's Cross City Cemetery, and we came across this very lovely stone and it had two different children on it, and we were trying to determine, we came up with all kinds of scenarios. Well, ultimately, in my research, I found they are cousins. Their mothers were sisters. Missy died, as you'll notice, I have it marked in blue, on June the 9th, and then it has an apostrophe 79. For whatever reason, the carver couldn't get the 8 in, so he chose to abbreviate that. Then when Maggie died, and we assume the stone was put up in 1880 when she died, rather than when Missy died. It wasn't added later, that they were put up at the same time. You can see on that one, he chose to only put in the last date, the 80. Why he didn't do that with the 79, don't know. But watch your tombstones for that kind of information. Abbreviations that you can find on tombstones. I had one once approach me. They had an SEN on theirs, and they knew for sure he was a senator from that state, and that's what that stood for. Well, SEN normally stands for senior, and in this case, he was not a senator. Again, this is in your handouts, and watch for those abbreviations. Julian versus Gregorian calendar. I don't know if any of you have encountered this, But the Julian calendar, New Year's Day was March the 25th, not January the 1st. The Julian calendar was changed to the Gregorian calendar in 1752. Gregorian is what we use today. So someone born March the 22nd of 1744 dies on March the 28th, 1745. Our Gregorian trained minds logically decipher this to mean that the person was just over 1 year of age. However, the Julian calendar was then in use. The person was actually only 6 days old at the time of death. And when you're recording this, you're going to go, but I thought they were a year old, and it doesn't match with how the other children are born. It doesn't make sense. Well, we look at March the 22nd, 1744, 23, 24, 25th, the new year, and then March the 26th is 1745, 27, 28, the child was only 6 days old when they passed. So if you're looking at dates prior to 1752, keep in mind the Julian calendar could be in effect. Sometimes on the tombstones, you will see the 1751/1752, or you could see 1744/45. If you see a double year date, that should be your signal to go, oh, this is the difference between the Julian and the Gregorian calendars. A documentation record. This becomes very important over the years as you do your research, because sometimes when you start, obviously, you can't find all of the records that are on here. You've got birth records, marriage records, death records, federal census records. And then on the back, there's church records, courthouse records, et cetera, et cetera. You want to record what you found and where you found it. You don't want to have to go back to the same census over and over and over, or go back to the same courthouse to look at marriage records again, because you want to be sure and copy down everything you find. Or if that county seat will allow you, take a picture of that record so that you have it. But a documentation record, however you want to keep this, will help you know, oh, I've already looked at that form. I don't need to go back to that. Primary sources. Primary sources are written documents that are contemporary with the event, meaning it's a birth, death, or burial record, something that was made at the time that the event happened. Original census, wills, probate records, church records, passenger lists, older letters dated and signed that states the event, like birth or marriage announcements. But note, incorrect dates can occur on any form. Census records are notorious for errors. The reason being, someone may have translated that or tried to put that into a more readable form for you, and maybe they inverted a number, or they picked up the month as the date instead of the date as the month. And then sometimes you'll find on a census record, the person was born in Ohio, and the next record you look at, they're born in Kentucky. Well, you need to make a note of that so that you can determine, did they move? Were they really born in Kentucky instead of Ohio, or was that a mistake? And then the different spelling of names. I have a great-grandfather whose first name is Adam. On 2 census records in a row, he's listed as Alton, A-L-T-O-N, instead of A-D-A-M. I knew his name was Adam. When I looked at the record, it looked like Adam to me, but whoever translated that thought it was Alton. Again, make that note, and then you can determine, oh, that is a mistake, or no, it's not. Secondary sources are everything recorded well after the event described. This includes all printed books or someone's translation of a German church record or an index to a census. There can be mistakes on there. Don't miscredit it, record it, and then you can sort it out as you further and find more primary sources. Internet versus courthouse. Like commercials, not everything on the internet is right. But not everything in a courthouse is right. You need to look at as many original documents as you can. Some internet connections that you can make, I've listed here. Ancestry does have a fee involved with it. You can go to a library and use it usually for free. FamilySearch.org is free to you and has quite a few records. Archeon.de, which is German records, you can get, are usually free. And then you go to the top of your right-hand corner of your Google page, and you can find translations for those pages. I say, like, an internet is not always correct. I have a cousin who has recorded quite a bit of information on the internet, and he has my father dying in Indiana. My father never lived in Indiana. My father died here in Ohio. And this particular cousin came to his funeral here in Ohio. I have commented and told him, you have this incorrect, but he refuses to change it. So again, you record in your records what you know to be correct. You can make note of anything that's incorrect, but that does happen quite often. Church records in Germany are called Kirchenbacher, and they are very thorough. If you can find many of them on the internet, and they will include birth dates, baptism dates, marriage, death, burial, and occupations. They may include financial information for the tolling bells at the funeral, the fees for the masses, list of confirmations, penance registers, communion lists, list of members, and family registries. In the occupation, I listed that one because as I was doing research on my family, I was told that my great-great-grandmother was a goose herder in her village. And indeed, when I found her son, my great-great-grandfather's name for his baptism, her name was listed as a goose herder. So those occupations can act as another form of confirmation for you that you have the correct record. I listed here, and this is in your handouts, different dates of when record keeping began, so that as depending on what part of Germany you're looking at, you may begin to find some of those records. Family registers, Familienbuchen or Osterfamilienbuchen. In 1808, Southern German parishes kept family group registries. In 1900, Hitler required all villages to update all of their parish records. And these will list names of husbands and wives, birth dates and places, marriage dates and places, parents' names, occupations, and residency. They become very important in trying to, if you know the name of your village, to try to find these family registries. My family is from a small village called Wittenweier. It's on the Rhine River, just about halfway down the Rhine River on the German side. It's very small. There's only about 1,200 people there. There was only about 1,200 people back when my family first started in there. And I didn't think I would find this, but I researched and I went Familienbuchen, Wittenweier, Germany. And lo and behold, one came up. These registries are available, of course, in Germany, but there's also a number of them at Harvard University in Boston and a bigger number of them at the St. Louis Library in St. Louis. So I would encourage you to see if you can find that. The familiar booklet will also list all of the children in chronological order. It includes their names, birth date, confirmation dates, marriage dates, death dates, and sometimes will include whether they've moved or immigrated. This is a page out of the familiar booklet for my family. They're listed in alphabetical order, and my last name's Ottman. And note the German spelling, Ottmann, which is very important. If you know your German spelling, you should always use that in some of your German research, because otherwise you won't find any information. And then it lists each of those people in alphabetical order. Looking at the close-up for entry number 1196, we find a Johann Jacob Ottman. It also references back to 1189, which is his parents. But at the very beginning, it tells me that he was married on September the 21st, 1823. He was born February the 12th, 1799. He married a Maria Magdalena Ganschert. She was the daughter of Johann George G., who is a citizen in Kuppenheim, and he was married to Magdalena Luther. Maria Magdalena Ganschert was born in Kuppenheim, May the 8th, 1803, and she died in Wittenweier on December the 11th, 1871. And yes, that is my great-great-grandfather. As we went on down the list, because they had 7 children, we find Ferdinand, or Jacob Friedrich, born May the 11th, 1831, and this is my great-grandfather. It also tells me he immigrated on April the 4th, 1854 to Ohio. Following him there was a stillborn baby on December the 7th, 1835, followed by a brother Wilhelm and a brother Martin. I have information on Wilhelm and Martin. They did both immigrate to America as well. So this can provide you with a great deal of information if you're fortunate enough to have that. If you go to St. Louis or to Harvard, be sure and take a lot of change with you so you can make copies of this. These books are not available for sale, but you can copy the pages, and you need to look at all of the different reference numbers. Like in this case, I would have gone back to 1189, which was Johann Jacob's parents' information. And then if you look at like Maria Barbara, the very first one that was here, you need to go look at 1347, because it will list her and her husband and their children. So you have to do a lot of flipping back and forth, but it's well worth the time for all of that valuable information. Civil registrations were kept from 1792 to 1876, and they're kept in the different government registries, and I've listed those particular names there for you. And again, that's in your handout. These are different dates of information that was kept in particular different locations. Again, giving you some idea of how far back you can go in some of your research. There has been recently, both by Ancestry and Family Search, additional German information that has been released. Middle part of Germany was very reluctant to release any of their, Baden was very protective of some of their information, but they have recently released quite a bit of that information, and you can go back and get some that are even older than what I'm representing here. Miscellaneous information that you need to be aware of. Keep in mind that during the 18th and 19th century, the borders of the Prussian states kept changing. So you might find in reference that a person was in this location and now they're in this location. The same way their religious significance would change depending on the lord and duchy who was over that particular area. They could be Catholic one year and Lutheran the next year, and the following year another Protestant name, depending on who was over that particular state. So keep in mind that those keep changing. I would suggest that you do a little studying of the German language and phonetics. It affects, again, how a place or surname is spelled and is often misspelled in records. The surname mapping is a good place to go if you have a surname and you want to see where that concentration is located, because you can put in, I want to know how many Ottmans were in, where they were located in 1750 or 1850 or 1900 in Germany, and it will show you that concentration. So that again, if in 1750 you haven't been able to find that village, it will at least give you a starting point of where you can start looking in those church records for that particular name. Myers-Ort's Gazetteer is another good source to use, and I've listed that website that you can go to, or you can just Google Myers-Ort's, and there's plenty of English translations on there. The German can be translated. It does take a little bit of time, and be sure that you watch the punctuation, because punctuation in Myers-Ort's means a lot. I would suggest as you start gathering up all of this information that you get a genealogy software program. I've listed quite a few of them on here, and you can go to the website there at the bottom. And again, I put this in your handout and compare them. What you want to look at is what information am I recording, but more importantly, what kind of reports can I get back? How am I going to consolidate this information? I currently use Brother's Keeper. When I started 30 years ago, someone recommended that to me, and it has served my purpose over all of these years. The rest of these are all very good and provide lots of wonderful reports and sources for you as well. But if you don't have one, you need to research that and look at it. My Brother's Keeper page, as an example, Jacob Friedrich Ottman, I have listed here his mother and father, spouses. He was married 3 different times, so I got the first one. I'm not quite sure who she was as yet, but then you can list when he was born, died, buried, occupation, etc., etc., etc. You can make notes on here. You can add pictures. There's just a myriad of things that you can do. And then I take all that information, and I took my niece, and one of the reports I can get is this fan chart. The nice thing with fan charts, while they sometimes are limited how far out they'll go, this one goes out to the 3rd great grandparents. You can see where your holes are, where you have not been able to fill in or find that particular information. There are other reports that can be on there as well, but it does provide you with an opportunity to see, oh, well, what information do I have? What information do I not have? Okay, what I'd like to do is address any questions that you might have at this time.
Okay, Nancy, we're waiting for people to put questions in. I think you've given a wonderful representation of how to do German basic genealogy research. So while we're waiting for questions, any other comments?
Yes, while this is beginning German genealogy and I focused on German sites, the basis for it is the same for any genealogy. It's gathering what information you think you know, gathering information from family members and what they know, and then trying to put this big puzzle together as to who fits where and how do I put this information together. But the important thing is collecting that and hanging that on a skeleton so that you can go back and find it, so that you can begin to put that together. And that's why those research checklists, the family group sheets, a genealogy program becomes really important, because as you well know, any of you that are doing research, you begin to collect mountains and mountains and mountains of papers, and you go, I think I know that, but I don't know where it is. And whether you use a color coding system, a numbering coding system, however you're recording that, it's a matter of you need to get it into one location so that you can begin to see that whole family tree and what is happening there.
Well, we have a whole bunch of questions, but
Yay!
3 of them are similar, and they want to know how to get the handout. After this presentation, we'll be emailing out the handout to each of you. Nancy wants to know, where did you say the family registers are in St. Louis?
At the St. Louis Public Library. And they have volumes and volumes and volumes. But if you go to the St. Louis Public Library and search for their German section, and then search for these family Buchens, it will come up, and you should be able to find. You have to know your village. And again, my village was very small. I researched that and thought, there's no way there's going to be a family registry there. And indeed it was, and it really supported a lot of the information I had already gathered. But St. Louis Public Library.
Audrey wants to know, are the registers in St. Louis and or Harvard indexed so that you don't have to waste a trip to either library?
No. They will list and let you know they have the village family registry, but they are not indexed.
Beth wants to make a note that if you're researching in Alsace-Lorraine, they speak both German and French, and the names would be translated too. So Jean Henry would become Johann Henrik, and depending upon which language the record was written in. So pay attention when you're in the Alsace-Lorraine to both languages.
That is correct. And you will find them sometime in the same record, part of it written in French, part of it written in German, and some of it written in Latin.
Nancy, would you like to make mention of the fact of the prevalence of German ancestry in the United States?
Well, we were talking before we started, Gwen and I, and we're saying there's a little bit of, seems to be a little bit of German in almost all of us. Ohio is very German based, and going on across into Indiana, Illinois, and Wisconsin. And then you'll get into some of the Scott Irish. And then of course, as you go south into the Carolinas, you get into the Scott Irish. But there is I think the last census, there was, the analysis was there was 80% of the population had some German background in them. So Germany has had its effect on us, that's for sure.
Do we have other questions for Nancy? Nancy, what are some of the best libraries in Ohio for German research?
The Columbus Public Library has a huge German research section, because when the Palatines to America moved to their new office location, they gave all of their research information to the Columbus Public Library, as well as cabinets of family histories that are there. So that's one that I know is good. Cincinnati, of course, is very good because that's a very German location. And I believe you have quite a bit of information just in your library there.
Yes,
But
we do.
those two, Columbus and Cincinnati, both have quite a bit. Cleveland has a little, but I would go to Columbus or Cincinnati. And then the Ohio Historical Society has a lot of German newspapers and information. And the Ohio Genealogical Society has a lot of has collected a lot of family histories.
Nancy says, our great-grandfather immigrated from Germany, but the ship record only said he came from Prussia. How can I find his village since it's so broad?
Well, that's always a challenge. If you have not done it, I would put his German name into Google and search that and see what comes up. I would also go to that geocentric map that I said on surnames to see if you can indicate or show what part of Germany he may have come from. If it's saying Prussia, my guess would be it would be central Germany from Baden or northern Germany. But that's just a guess because one never knows. Again, what he was telling the census record or the ship record, they went, oh, they're all from Prussia. You just have to begin to narrow that down. The reason I suggested Googling the name out of curiosity one day, I just happened to put in the German spelling of Ottman, and up came a family tree that I went, boy, those names look real familiar to me. And indeed, it ended up being my great-great-grandfather's oldest sister. And in fact, in 2013, then I had got the opportunity to go to Germany and meet my cousin. And it was very exciting. And of course, then he gave me a lot of information that I had not known before. And so you just never know. Not all internet information is valid, but there's a lot of good stuff out there as well.
We have another question. Where in Harvard are the family records?
At the Harvard University Library.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Audrey says, any suggestions for determining whether the child that someone attributed to my grandmother, who had a very common first name and surname, was really born to her? There is a baptismal date, but no date of death. No mention of this child in any of my immediate family history.
Okay. Depending on when that child was baptized and or born, you might look at the family naming process and see if that fits into any of those categories. Was this the mother's first name, or the mother's sister's? The child was named after the mother's sister or the father's mother. I would look in if you know the church where she was baptized, I would go in and begin to look for death records. Baptismal records I have three relatives of my great-grandfather. I can find baptismal records. I can't find birth records, can't find death records, but I have their baptismal records. My assumption is, because they died very close to their father's date of death, that they all died in an epidemic. So if you can find health records, in the place where they live, that there were any epidemics and those names happen to be recorded, you might find some success there. The problem is that with some epidemics, as large quantities of people passed, they would be put into communal graves and those names were not recorded. but those are some other sources that you can use. You might check any newspaper articles that are close around the death date of this child, if you know it, or the baptismal date of the child, because sometimes those events were recorded in newspapers by the church. It just depends on what time frame we're talking about. But I happened to find, I looked for 30 years for my, on my dad's side of the family, my grandparents' marriage information from Germany. By accident, my sister happened to be looking at a German newspaper, and the church had recorded their wedding anniversary in the newspaper and gave the village names of where they came from. And that was the only place I'd ever been able to find it. So back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, all the way up until probably 1950, newspapers used to record all kinds of social events. So you might look there.
3 quick comments. First, Helen says, thank you so much, Nancy. Always enjoy hearing from you. She has to scoot to another meeting.
Okay.
Roger tells us that in addition to sending the handouts via email, which Beth and I will do, he will place them in the website under chapter documents. And Beth wants to know what's the best source of German newspapers in the area.
Because I live close to Columbus, I go to the Columbus Library, Public Library, and or to the Ohio Historical Society. They have a huge collection of German newspapers. Some of them you can get online. Not all of them, but some of them. And keep in mind with the German newspapers, they're not laid out like our modern day newspapers. There's not all the obituaries on one page or all the births on one page. They're mixed in. As an example, when I found the great-great-grandparents' marriage information, it was under an article that the church had submitted. It was on a random page. And so you have to kind of scroll through all of that. And of course, they're in German, so they've not been translated into English. So you have to know a few of those key words for marriage and death. And of course, you look for the surname, and that's sometimes you can do a search and it will take you to that surname or that church name or that village name. But it takes some time. But those two places I know have quite a stash of German newspapers.
Janet says, is there a source in Michigan you recommend? My family settled first near Hamtramck, near Detroit, where there are many Polish and German settlers.
I would go to the Detroit Public Library. I'm not overly familiar with it, but I would think would be a great source that if they don't have what you might be looking for, they could lead you to another source. The other thing is look for any genealogical or historical societies in that area, write them and say, I'm looking for information on, and they may be able to help you.
Well, Nancy, thank you. You've been such an inspiration and a great resource for us this morning. I'm sure that if people have individually private questions, we can somehow get them to you.
Well, on the bottom of the handout is my email.
And the handout will go out both via email and on the website. Right. Remember, everybody, dues. If you've got time, drop a check for $20 at the library, or mail it to us, or let us know on the website so we can get you listed as a formal member. And remember, the documents are at the website, as well as many other wonderful resources. Audrey says thank you. I say thank you. So thank you so much. We wish you a wonderful weekend, and I wish all of you a wonderful weekend. Remember, the next meeting is on the 12th of November, 11/12. And we look forward to hearing at that time from, I believe, Roger Marble. So Thank you again. We're going to say goodbye and everybody go enjoy the wonderful sunshine.
And thank you. It's been delightful.
Take care all. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.